I'm so glad to see some familiar faces from last week and some new faces who are joining us for the first time. My name is Nate Stevens. I am a facilitation and collective impact consultant. And so just to give a quick introduction again for the new folks, I work with communities across the country and around the world, really to develop the skills to collaborate differently, to think systemically, to try to control less and influence more, and more than anything, to create spaces where community and the most marginalized voices can not only participate, but really flourish, which is what this whole series is about. And so this is the second session. As you can see, I'll give a little more context about that. Just a reminder that, this is a segue that I mentioned in the Spanish version of this on Wednesday too. These kinds of trainings and this kind of systemic support doesn't happen on its own. And it's exciting to see a group like the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation investing in the community's capacity to work together, to work differently, to work with a facilitative leadership style, which we'll be talking a little bit more about today. So quick reminder, we're already at the midpoint nearly of our 4-session arc for this facilitative leadership training. We spent the first session, and if you missed the first session, don't worry about that. We have a recording, we have the materials. So as much as you're willing and interested in investing time to catch up, that's all there for you. But we really spent that time talking about what is facilitation? What is a facilitative perspective? What is this thing we're talking about, and why spend so much time talking about it? Today, I want to transition to, okay, given that, what are some tools that we have, and really what I'm going to give is more of a toolkit that we have to respond to those needs. If facilitation is something we want to do, and I'll remind you what that is, how do we approach that? How do we get started? We're going to talk about that today. And a reminder that the second half really is putting these things into practice. I think facilitation, just like most, if not all, skills that we learn when we're adults at least, we learn through practice. And so if you did miss the last session, I asked everyone to come with an idea of a meeting, convening, a conference, a whatever, something that you will, or that you have the opportunity to be facilitating in. And we'll talk about how that, I mean that very loosely. Maybe it's you leading a small group discussion, whatever it is. We're going to bring in those ideas and be able to workshop them and actually think about, and we're going to do this today, starting today. So if you didn't know that this is the piece of homework, don't worry, you have a couple of minutes to reflect a little bit on a meeting, something coming up that you want to facilitate differently. And the second 2 sessions, like I was saying, is really going to reflect on and put to practice what we've talked about here, and reflect on what does that look like? How does that feel? How can we continue to grow as facilitators and as leaders? So the agenda for today, before I even get into that, are there any questions or just any questions that are on people's minds at the beginning, either from the last session or as you're coming in today? Before, we're obviously going to do some check-in questions and introductions in a second, but are there any questions? Anybody wondering, am I in the right room? What am I doing here? Okay, that's good. All right, so the plan for the next approximately hour and 20 minutes will be, we're going to start with a quick check-in, and we're going to do, I always like whether we're in person or virtual, I tell people to turn to their neighbor, and we can do that virtually. So we'll do that in a second, even though you're not side by side like you might be if we were in the classroom near Lake Tahoe that I keep visualizing as I prepare these sessions. I'm going to share a little bit today about designing meeting agendas and how we can approach them, how to go about that. Where do you get started? And then we're going to give you some time in small groups to put that to practice and spend some time really thinking about and using a human-centered design approach to empathize with and define who is your audience for your meeting, for whatever you're facilitating. Then I'll close with introducing the toolkit that I mentioned and really give kind of an overview of why that toolkit and what it contains. And we'll close with some discussion. So I'm hoping that today we have some good blocks of time where we can just chat a little bit, reflect, and that's the plan. So to kick us off, I want to start with this image that I learned recently from a co-facilitator and a good friend of mine, Mary Marini in Kenya. She and I have been co-facilitating a few global summits virtually lately. She from Nairobi and me from Washington, DC. And I've learned some great virtual facilitation techniques. So she calls this the blob tree. I'm not sure why it's called the blob tree, and she didn't know either, actually. But as you can see, there are all these different figures who are having different experiences on the tree or around the tree. Take a minute, just a second, to reflect on maybe which one are you coming in as this morning. They're all equally valid. They're all equally okay in terms of experiences. And as you're thinking about that, we're going to transition to Mentimeter. Remember, folks, for those of you who participated in the first time, Mentimeter is the polling software that we're using, and it's something really simple. It's free to use, but also I'm not pushing any particular platforms in this training, so don't feel like Mentimeter. There are many other polling platforms that one can use, but if you can go now to menti.com, like you see here, you can use the QR code on your phone if you'd like to, and the code is also in the chat. So we'll give folks just a couple of seconds here to transition over, and I will transition my screen as well. Let me know if anybody's having any issues. I'm seeing some hearts already, so this means some people are coming in. As you enter Mentimeter, this should be what you see, don't worry. Okay, good. I'm seeing most of the group is there. As you're still, some people might still be getting there, don't worry. Something cool about Mentimeter and other similar sites is that we can upload a picture, and the polling question can be to click on the picture. So I use this feature for, you know, I'll use a map of where are people calling from, or where do people consider home. And it's a nice quick technique that people can engage with, and it's visual, which is a little different. So take a minute to click which you've been thinking, which of the figures reflects you. We have a good a good number here. Okay, somebody's feeling pretty nice up on top, a 15. We have somebody's hanging on by a thread a little bit. Anybody want to reflect on what you're seeing, or to share why you indicated what you did?
I'll share that I'm reading way too far into each one.
So what does that mean? Say a little bit more.
I totally, like, I guess it's just such a good graphic because I see, like, I don't know, I see where I'm at in my personal life. I see where I'm at, like, on my internal team. I see, like, kind of how I, like, think of myself outside of maybe, like, what's going on this morning, you know, like, I totally always want to be like 15 and 20 and 10, but like this morning, I don't know if I'm there, you know?
We might always want to be there, but
yeah.
The feasibility or sustainability of that is another matter. Thanks for sharing, Joe.
Yeah, I think I ended up at 18.
18, okay. Which one's 18?
Yeah,
Let's
and
see. Oh, yeah, okay.
I'm Sachet. I'm gladly a number 5 on the ground, and I think that may also just be a reflection of where we are in the week, but I think kind of also recognizing the importance of rest in contrast to busyness, and just that's where I am this morning.
A number 5 is perfectly fine for 9 a.m. on a Friday morning. Yes, I'm surprised more people aren't clicking on that one. Anyone else? Just one more person, and then I'm going to have you turn to your neighbor for another check-in question.
Well, this is Sharon Romack. I picked number because I'm happy to be here, but I'm also kind of just holding on to things this morning. So I'm here, but I'm also kind of supporting myself. So that's why I picked 15.
I really appreciate that, and that breakdown too, that you want to be here, but you're going to need a little support. Maybe you have some coffee next to you or tea, something to fortify you, hopefully this morning. And I appreciate that awareness. I mean, it isn't always easy to show up. I mean, to virtual meetings generally, I think we all might experience a little bit of dread before going to meetings. But yeah, coming to a training, yeah, I get that. So I want to point out to folks really quickly before we take another step in the process that just with this one simple image, we already have a really good idea of kind of what the range of experiences people are coming into the room with. Obviously, it's not holistic. We heard from Jill and Sharon about how, you know, I'm kind of wearing multiple hats. I could be multiple of these. But as a facilitator, now I know, okay, well, you know, nobody's a 10 or a 20. You know, if those are like the really enthusiastically positive, and that's totally fine, but that's helpful information for me to know as somebody facilitating the group. Maybe I need to be aware of that as I'm setting the tone. Maybe we're trying to get there, whatever. It's just more information, more data as a facilitator is better, because then you're not running on your assumptions. I'm not running on the face that Sharon made, or the way, you know, Phyllis turned off her camera. Does that mean that she's losing interest, or whatever? The stories I'm telling myself, this is real data that you all shared. So this is really actually useful. So right now we're going to turn to our neighbors. And what that means is I'm just going to put you in random breakout rooms. You're going to be with one other person. And the question is just share how you responded on the blob tree. And then also what stuck with you from the last session. Anything, whether you were here or not, if you reviewed the materials, if you caught an email, if you heard from a colleague, what it was. We're not looking for an exhaustive summary. I'm just looking for what stuck with you personally. So turn to your neighbor in just 1 second. All right, and I'll bring you back in 3 minutes. We're not going to spend much time here. I know you got yanked back a little unceremoniously, as is always the case. And one group did have a few more people. We got started at different points, so we roll with it. So not everybody maybe got to share in that group. Apologies. I'd love to hear from a couple of people who haven't spoken yet today. Just what came up in your conversation, either something that you shared or something you heard.
I can share. I was with Sarah in my breakout, and we both actually didn't hit the same exact little character, but a similar one of climbing up the tree and just feeling like we're catching up on a lot of things. So the reaching was appropriate.
Thanks, Caroline. And did anything come up about what stuck with you from the last session?
Knowing your audience and just catering and not looking out for what you need from the meeting, but also what's going to benefit them.
Awesome. We are definitely going to be circling back to that today. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
A theme in our group was that there are things that may be pulling our attention away or that have, kind of, I'm paraphrasing, but, we're not coming in with full batteries, but still grateful to be here and grateful that you're doing this.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that's just an important thing for us to hear and recognize as a group of facilitators as well, that we can't enforce people to show up with energy. We can't control anything about people. So yeah, it's okay to show up as you are. But knowing that is much more helpful. So thank you for sharing that, Megan. I appreciate it. Kate, I see your hand up.
Hi. Yeah, I had was in a group with Allison, which was lovely because we never see each other. But I was thinking about myself and how I listen, and how the way that I listen is actually problematic. I listen to gauge whether I agree or disagree. And so in doing that, I am not always hearing fully what's being said, or hearing sort of what's behind what's being said, because I'm constantly kind of evaluating it. And so I've been trying to get out of that habit, but it's a hard one for me to break. So I'd love to sort of maybe hear something about that sometime in the next few days.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Kate. I mean, one thing that I think you're definitely highlighting is that active listening is a practice. It is an actual skill that most of us just don't learn. And so it is something, it's a muscle to develop and flex. So I appreciate your awareness of that, because obviously we can't build it if we're not aware of it. Laura, did I see your hand up as well?
Sure, yes, we were in our group, we just acknowledged on the tree how, personal life and work life, how they both influence where we're sitting on the tree. And just, it's kind of stating the obvious in some ways, but I think it's a good reminder too that one definitely can influence the other on where you're sitting.
Absolutely, we're all multifaceted people coming in with a few different pressures and perspectives and identities. So yes, thank you all for mentioning that. Okay. Anything else? I don't want to close it too quickly, but I'm going to transition to a couple slides. Okay. Let's see how fluidly I can transition there. Okay, great. All right. So to start off, I just wanted to share again this list of group agreements from our last meeting. These are just kind of our working norms. What do we agree to as a group of people who are coming in and sharing space together and trying to learn together? Take a minute to review. I don't think there's anything too surprising here. Be aware of the space you take up and that you're providing others. Be willing to do things differently, experience discomfort. Is there anything that's missing here now that you're looking at it in a second session or with fresh eyes?
I wouldn't mind.
Yes, Sarah.
I always like to add the element of having fun.
That's, yes, let's name that. That's definitely, I think, always an assumption on my part. I like to, lead with humor. It might not always be funny, but I'm trying my best with humor most of the time. Having fun in whatever way you bring fun is a huge contribution. Yes, I completely agree. Okay, that's a good one. I'll add that for next time. Okay, so let's start with just a little refresher about what is this thing that we're talking about. A reminder that this is easier for the Spanish-speaking group that meets on Wednesdays, because fácil in Spanish is easy. And that's really what this is about. Facilitating is from the Latin root of let's make things, and I put complex because anything working with more than one person is pretty complex. So you're trying to make something that's complex simpler. You're trying to make it easier. One way to start breaking this down is to think about the ripple effects that we have. We talked about the different things that are affecting us, right? I mean, we have home, we have jobs, we have the larger world. We're having an effect on all of those things as well. So what our individual energy is, our personal perspective, our personal process, enables us to develop a process and share that perspective with others, and then an institution, and then we can push out. And thinking about those ripple effects, I think is really key in facilitation. I don't have any control over anything besides the time we spend together and the little agenda that I have here. But I can really, it's just what I do that I have control over. And so as a facilitator, being really hyper aware of what's my role? How am I presenting? What's the energy that I'm bringing? And I think more than anything, coming in with really clear intentions. What is it that I am trying to do here? So I think it's helpful to remember, and some of this is obvious and we heard some of it already, but every meeting has the potential to leave participants feeling a few different things. And this applies to everything. We have the opportunity to make people feel like they're involved in a shared objective. So whether that's populating a brainstorming list in a staff meeting, or listening to a presentation together, having a discussion is a shared objective. Getting people on the same page, building a shared sense of purpose is something powerful. We can leave people feeling like they learned something new. We can't control what people learn or what they take away, but we can leave them with something new, some piece of information. So it's important to create space for others to talk, bring in other voices and experiences, because we want to surface as many new ideas as possible, because I don't know what's going to resonate with Jill, for example. Maybe it's something just from her conversation in the breakout sessions. Maybe it's not me, and that's totally fine, but creating opportunities for people to learn something new. We want people to feel more connected among each other. And that's particularly true when we're working in communities. You all work in the same geographic area for the most part. Some people more spread out than others, but generally. So let's use this opportunity to get more connected, actually build some relationships. And I think this is what Sarah was just saying or alluding to. We can leave people feeling like they have more energy and purpose at the end of the meeting. We've all been spending a lot of time in virtual meetings in the past couple of years that leave us with less energy at the end of it than we had at the beginning of it. And that doesn't have to be the case. We could leave people with provocative questions. We could leave people with a fun experience. We could leave people with something interesting and exciting that's coming next. What's happening next? All of those things leave people with a different sort of energy, a different expectation. And that actually affects their day. When you think about the ripple effects, how are you affecting people who then go on to affect other people? A facilitative perspective is really thinking about that. So where do we start? This is, I think, the biggest question as we approach a meeting or thinking about an experience that we're trying to craft. And I'll bring us back to the first slide from those 8 principles or metaphors from the last session of starting with who, which is absolutely fundamental. And not just because it's a nice thing to do, but I really see it as a process based in human-centered design. Some of you might be familiar with this or with design thinking. This is a whole field that has grown out of a number of different schools and consulting practices at this point, but I think originally the Stanford D School was really influential, and a firm called IDEO in particular. And there's a very helpful and rich world of resources around human-centered design. And I would encourage everybody to, if you're interested, go find the handbook on human-centered design. And there's a whole, there's a rich toolkit of activities and processes, suggestions to create more participatory experiences and really to walk through each of these steps that I'm going to talk about right now. So to be honest, and this is where my caveat comes in, I think there's also kind of a bit of a cult of human-centered design that's coming up, that's developed. Like any sexy new term, people get really excited about it. Design thinking, human-centered design, people are talking about a lot. I think it's helpful and really revolutionary for a very simple reason. And that's these first 2 steps, that when we're designing, when we're thinking of, when we're planning anything, we start with empathy to define the problem, not starting with our own good ideas or our own assumption of the problem. And so this is something we heard, I think somebody was sharing in the What Stuck With Us from the last session about really focusing on the participant and on their perspective and framing things around them. I can't overemphasize this enough. This makes me think of an Albert Einstein quote that some of you have probably heard, where he said that if I had an hour to solve a problem, I would spend the first 55 minutes thinking about understanding the problem, and the last 5 minutes coming up with a solution. That's really what we're talking about here, is where we devote our time and where we devote our thinking. I think we stress a lot about the activities and what we should do, and how am I going to do the Zoom, and how am I going to do the breakout rooms? And we think about the what's a lot. We should really be thinking much more about the why and the who, and really empathizing with, and by empathy, I mean, we all work in some sort of social change, social work here. So you know how to empathize. And there are tools for empathy as well, right? Within the Human-Centered Design Handbook. And I can share a link with you of kind of a recommended list, or one that I've used. There are tools that we can use to empathize with people. There are empathy maps. There are empathy appreciative inquiries, appreciative interviews between people, really trying to understand not just who is a person, we can only do our best to understand that, but what do they want out of this experience? What are their priorities, their objectives? And using that to define, all right, here's what we're trying to do in this meeting. Here's our objective. Then we look for the what's. How do we do that? What are the tools we need? What are the activities? Then we get to the iteration and trying things out, and where we learn from working with these folks, this different group. So that those last three of brainstorming and prototyping and testing and continuing to iterate. I like that this image has all the flow going. It's not a linear process we have here. It's all important, and really thinking about this as a process, I think, is really helpful. But I really want to draw your attention to these first two steps, the empathizing and empathy leading to the definition, because I think that's really where the revolution is, that we're not leading with ourselves and the way I always put it is, the world has plenty of good ideas. There's just no shortage of good ideas. What we really need to understand is what are the issues in the first place? And that applies to facilitation and design. Before I share just a few kind of more concrete suggestions, any reactions or questions based on what I've shared so far? Okay, so I'm going to get into these, because I think this is more of the practical stuff and what it's going to sound familiar. So some of the key elements, if we're really trying to design an intentionally participatory meeting, we need to really break down the who is not just the empathizing with the archetype of the person or having an idea of their backgrounds or demographics, but also just the practical things of how many people. That changes our options in terms of how we engage and how folks participate. I think I mentioned in our last session that this group is a little bit bigger, almost twice the size of the Spanish-speaking group. And so I have to make little tweaks to make sure that the participation or the opportunities for participation are as present in this space as they are there. I think it's helpful to share an untimed agenda in advance. Obviously, I'm not doing that with all of you, so that's not a best practice that I'm following here. But if we're thinking about how we can make people feel most comfortable and most prepared coming into a meeting, there are definitely people, and some of you are probably among them, who like to have an idea of what's on the agenda coming in. That's going to help me participate, because I don't want to be caught flat-footed. I need a little more time to process, or whatever it is. I do emphasize untimed, though, because I never want the participants to have an idea of what times I've put in the agenda, because I'm going to be changing them in response to what's happening in the moment. Where's the actual energy in the conversation going? Where do we actually seem to need more time to talk? We need to be able to adapt and flow together. And I don't want anybody to be distracted by what was really just, kind of our first prototype. The timed agenda that I have here this is my prototype. we're already behind schedule on one of the things because we needed more time somewhere else, and that's fine. I just don't want you all to know that and be distracted by that. So an untimed agenda is a recommendation. Establish group norms as a group. I think this is a really effective way to get buy-in immediately and participation from people. So in the first session, I kind of presented that slide to you of here are some group norms of how we can work together. And we've gotten some feedback, and Sarah had a great suggestion today of a point that we could add. But if we were to build that together, already we've kind of defined ourselves as a group. We've kind of defined ourselves by doing that. It's really I forget there's an anthropological term for the, like the doing, by saying it, we do it, we become it. You become a group by setting the collective expectations of the group. So that can be a powerful little hack. Respect the participants' time. I think this is especially important in our current world where we're going back to back from virtual meeting to virtual meeting and don't have the grace period that we used to, at least when we were even walking from office to office or building to building. So people's schedules are really packed. So I like to make sure that I end or at least give people permission to leave on time. And if any conversation continues afterward, that we keep it to a minimum. And really make it explicit that, okay, this is the official time. This is what you committed. We need to respect that because you're all busy. Your participants are busy. Something else that we sometimes forget we can do is we can distribute roles in the meetings, whether they're in person or virtual, sharing the facilitation role. Nominating different facilitators for different meetings is a great way to get teams involved, to share leadership among your teams and your staff. If you're looking for ways to get people involved, there's no shortage, there's no end of roles that you could create. There is a note-taking role and there's a timekeeping role. Someone could be presenting the slides and transitioning between the polls and the slides. As you can see, I'm doing that by myself. It could probably be a little more elegant if someone else was tasked just with that activity. So ask for support as facilitators. And then make sure to leave enough time. Leaving enough time and space for reflections and reactions. Taking pauses, leaving some space for silence, inviting people to share, and being okay with we talked last week, I think, about being okay with the silence, and that it's the facilitator's job to hold that silence for folks. So I do want to get us into an activity in just a couple of minutes here to start thinking about this, applying this to your real work. But before that, any reactions to this list or kind of how I've framed prepping a meeting? Thanks for the applause, Sarah. I love the maybe it was unintentional. I appreciated it nonetheless. It's nice to see use of the emojis generally, though. Lizzie, I see your hand up.
I am wondering how often it's recommended to establish group norms. I have some groups that have been going on for many years, but as people change, I mean, it just takes so much time and you're meeting 3 times a year. I don't want to do it annually, but at what point do you need to take half of, a meeting? Or, I mean, just what suggestions do you have?
I would never take half a meeting. This should always be something. And really, I mean, this is also something that I do a lot is just, I tell people, we're not going to spend much time on this. I want to open the space for this. This is something important. We're not going to spend much time on this. So you can always say that and just kind of nip it. I think for a case like that, Lizzie, I mean, if you have 3 meetings and these are kind of, high stakes, there's a lot rests on these 3 meetings, that might not be your best use of time, but it is still probably a good use of time to present some conditions. So maybe it's based on what you've experienced with this group before. You can make a list of here's what I'm proposing as some working norms, and then you could just do it like I did. Any reactions to this? Anything that you disagree with, or anything that you would add? And then that's maybe at most a 2-minute check-in. We at least have that established, at least in people's minds, are some of the things that have been recurring problems or that have been issues in the past. Mm-hmm. And that might be the best we can do in meetings like that. It's not like you have the time to develop a culture among the group or anything like that. But it's still worth a check-in because they don't work together very often. So just making the most of it, to make the most, and that's the other way that I talk about it. To make the most of our valuable time, here's how we need to work together. So it's not just a nice thing. You're proposing this because we want to work well together.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, Sarah, Sharon, and then Devin.
So applause and a question. I'm struggling with the untimed agenda. I've always thought that I needed to create timed agendas, partly because I actually review an agenda before a meeting so I can get buy-in about where we spend our time. Can you?
Absolutely. So, and every recommendation is just that. I don't think, I don't think there are any testaments that we need to observe in facilitation per se. But so I have, this is my outline, and it's goofy with the blurry background, but my agenda is timed. I have a timed agenda with all of the activities so that I know where we're dedicating the most time. And I've thought through kind of, we need more time for this activity. And, if there is a reason, if you're checking in with people beforehand, there's no, you don't have to, this isn't like some mysterious occult document that you can't share with people for whatever reason. Like, if there's a reason for that, getting people's buy-in beforehand, definitely. I just am also recommending to folks from experience that it can be a distraction, and somebody can jump in saying, hey, aren't we supposed to be doing this? And well, maybe I've read the room and that's not the priority of the group anymore. It depends on the context, because some groups you're co-creating the agenda together, and so it's really something that we're like holding each other accountable to respect. Those are different, that's a different kind of style. It's not like you're one facilitator who's kind of setting the agenda and holding the space. But when that is the case, I just try to minimize the expectations and assumptions for participants so that they can be as present as possible. But there are definitely reasons why you would. I can totally see that. Sharon.
Yes, Sarah pretty much covered what I was going to ask about, but just to follow up on something you said, Nate, it certainly is acceptable to use a timed agenda if necessary. Is it appropriate to just share it with certain people? Because I have found that if I'm aware of someone who likes to hear themselves talk or is very long-winded, it helps for them to know that after 10 minutes, we're supposed to move on here. But I wouldn't necessarily want to restrict the rest of the people, but just the ones who take advantage of an opportunity to speak. Any comment on that?
Yeah, I'm totally sympathetic to managing the person who's so eager to talk all the time, and that seems that might work depending on the group. The one hesitation and fear that I might have is that sharing different levels of information with different participants, unless there's like, so another way that you could resolve this, Sharon, is kind of conscripting this active person into a support role in the meeting. So we have, distribute the roles. Maybe the talkative person maybe should be the note taker sometimes. They can't talk too much while they're taking notes or while they're doing whatever. So that's one way that we can do it. But my academic background, if we ever want to really geek out, is in my master's concentration was in power and development systems. So I'm constantly thinking about who's making decisions and how decisions are being made, who has the power to do that. And so as facilitators, we also need to be mindful about accidentally gatekeeping or accidentally creating the perception of like it might be your strategy to make this talkative person aware of the time that they have available, but maybe their colleague perceives it as them getting preferential treatment or something. Just being aware of that as a possibility. But otherwise, it sounds like a creative way to remind someone. Devin, and then Allison, and then we're going to move on to the activity.
Oh, thanks, Nate. Yeah, no, I was curious just to hear more of your thoughts on timekeeping, and I think we covered a lot of it. And yeah, it's quite interesting to look at that and how it reflects, needing a good moderator, a good facilitator to be on it, or, even alludes to, people, needing that management piece to keep them in line. So that's an interesting thought. So I appreciate hearing what you had to say.
Yeah, I think the timekeeping one is an underappreciated role that we can always use help with, just because it's so easy to be carried away by the conversation. And we're supposed to be, you're supposed to do something kind of impossible when you're facilitating. You're supposed to be hyper present and also keeping track of the 30,000 view of the time and how things are going and how you're adhering to the agenda. And so that takes practice. And so the more comfortable you are managing time, and if you see my eyes flicking to the corner of my screen, it's me constantly checking on time, and it's me constantly referring to my agenda here to see how we're doing and making little changes. So I'm comfortable with that. But yeah, I think it's a great idea to nominate somebody, even just to slip you a note of 30 minutes left, 15 minutes left, just for yourself, so you have that outsourced a little bit.
Do you ever establish that in ground rules? Just like, hey, if someone's getting too thick on time, I will,
I think that's
give you a thumbs up, or because that's so hard to interject, consistently and jump in. And
that's a great thing to include in ground rules. Just setting the expectation of, hey, we all know that sometimes we're running out of time or we have to move on. Don't be surprised or hurt if you see me do this, or whatever it is. You're letting people know it's not personal. And obviously it's then also your responsibility not to make it personal. We can't just shut up the person we're annoyed with in the office just because we have the power of the facilitator. But yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, Allison.
And so I recognize that if we are short on time, maybe we can talk about this later, but I'm also looking at this list, which I really like this list a lot. It's super helpful. And also through the lens of providing interpretation during meetings. So in English into Spanish, and then the distribute the roles. I think that, or are you, Christine? You've done an amazing job over the last year. We're learning to build this as we go kind of thing. And I think that one thing I'd love to talk more at some point about is the specific roles and how to do that in an equitable way. And there's more roles that I think we could probably appoint or ask people to volunteer for, and just kind of what are those roles and how do we do that effectively?
Absolutely. Thank you for raising that, Allison. Translation is such a fascinating and challenging issue in virtual settings. So first, there is a bit of a resource constraint for a lot of people, because what people deserve is professional translation, and having a professional translator who's joining. There's a translation function on Zoom that creates another line for people to listen to the translator. The technology is all there. It's committing the resources most of the time to having a committed translator, and that's a real challenge. So many communities I'm working with are struggling to mobilize around that accessibility and really investing in accessibility that way. I'll tell you that I have regular meetings that are with a bilingual group of county staff who are speaking English and community members who are speaking Spanish. And to facilitate the bilingual meeting, the co-facilitator and I, who is the leader of the project, we're translating in the chat. So she's leading the meeting and I'll be translating into Spanish what she's saying, which is us making the best of a bad situation. So, trying our best to make that accessible for folks, but that's not ideal. That's not best practice. I think not a lot of people are doing best practice in really making meetings accessible with translation. But I'm glad to hear it sounds like something's already underway in your group and in the community. So I encourage that investment and continuing to explore that, because the technology's there, the capacity's there. It's really just the willingness to find those resources, in my experience. And we can circle back on that in the future too. All right, so without further ado, let's spend some time actually applying some of this stuff and thinking about that first step of the human-centered design process. So spending some time actually empathizing with the groups you're going to be facilitating. So this is actually thinking about whatever that idea is of whatever meeting, event, etc. We're not asking anything formal. This isn't, you're not going to be graded in this course. This is just something to for you, an opportunity for you to apply. I'm going to put you in groups of 3 in little breakout rooms, and just share, each take a turn or discuss at the same time. For each of those events, who is the audience for the meeting? Who is it? Let's define the audience first and foremost. What is your audience hoping to achieve? What are their priorities? Obviously, now isn't one of those times where we can use one of those empathizing tools like going out and doing an empathetic interview or going out and doing direct engagement or something like that. We kind of have to use our imaginations a bit, but just try to put yourself in the shoes of your participants. What are their priorities? And then what expectations might the audience have coming into the meeting? What might their expectations be based on past experiences or past experiences? Are there any questions about this conversation and what we're trying to do? It's pretty open. Basically, we're just focusing on that first step, empathizing a bit to define our audience. So I will put you in groups of 3. Welcome back, folks. I'd love to hear from someone just what came up. And in particular, the question that's on my mind right now is, how do you see that meeting's objectives now after that conversation? But also share whatever and however you'd like, anybody who's feeling called to. Christina, I see your hand.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would just like to start, with I brought up our need to be inclusive. For the Community Collaborative, we host a monthly meeting where we have a bilingual audience. And for the very first time, we had a bilingual meeting for one of our other programs, Force Futures, last night, and it was on a really important topic, evacuation. And I don't know that we got a good response from our Spanish-speaking community to attend the meeting. And so we were just kind of talking about, what are some of the barriers to attendance, and how can we be more inclusive? And sometimes I think that framing needs to take us out of our traditional way that we host our meetings. And so, especially for such an important topic. Victoria, thank you so much for such good insight. But I think, moving forward, it would be really great for us to actually do an in-person event, meet all of our community members where they're at in their neighborhood, and be able to deliver the message that way. And so I think that was I really appreciate the time to talk that through. And I think there's some good next steps for us.
Christina, I really appreciate that, and like so many parts of what you said, you're making me think about when you said, we have to get outside of our normal ways of working. I think it's helpful to start with the who and really think about what is the experience we want to create for them, and then work backward from there. So rather than starting with what do I want to do and how do I usually do a meeting, it's who's supposed to be there? What are they supposed to experience? And I know from other groups that I'm working with, Christina, that being in person is more accessible for many communities than it is for others. And so being aware of that. I also I was thinking about this while you all were in your breakout rooms too, about Allison's question about bilingual meetings and how we make those more accessible. I think what Christina's highlighting is, and this is really important to articulate for the English speaking crowd, I think as well, that if we want to go fast, it's that old proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go together, if you want to go far, go together. If we're trying to go far, we need to figure out how to work together. And that takes a little more time. It's not the fast option. It's really being explicit that being inclusive and making this, if we have to do simultaneous translation, which I do in some meetings, I'm doing a dual version, that totally works. It's just not the fastest way. And everybody needs to be on board with recognizing that we're slowing down intentionally. We might not get through the agenda at the speed or the way that some people want to, but that's allowing other people to participate and have their voices heard. Thanks for sharing that, Christina. Sarah.
One huge realization that I've had going into today, thinking about my meeting example, was that, and this is hard for me because I really want to see more action, but that's my agenda, and that the audience, one of the groups I work with, it's actually more just about talking and discussing things, and that outcomes from a meeting might not just be action oriented. I don't know if you can provide any insight there, because that's hard for me to grapple with.
I mean, I can empathize with that being an unsatisfying. If I know that that can be frustrating, and that action is how we measure the success and outputs of anything in our society, groups, individuals, events. So I think that we constantly have that pressure and that pull. And I had a meeting earlier this morning with someone from another community who is really frustrated with this right now. So that's just to empathize with. Yes, I think that that is just a constant, it's a struggle, especially for those of us who are more action oriented. There are two things that are coming to mind. One is a facilitative activity, and I could maybe present on this next time if there's interest. It's something called the Leadership Compass. It goes by other names as well. It's based on the medicine wheel, the 4 primary directions, and kind of the characteristics of those. But it's an activity that breaks down different people's leadership styles into, some are more action oriented, some are more vision oriented, some are more analytical, some are more relational. And so some of us want action, and that validates that that is important to have action oriented people. But it also, the tool reminds us that, but they're also the visionary and analytical and relationship folks, they're also onto something in wanting to, what, you know, the action oriented people call it spinning their wheels, but they're actually building relationships. They're actually analyzing the issue further. So just also spreading out that, or kind of like enriching that definition, I think is useful. Also, Sarah, this is something I'm not going to get into in this training, but just a resource if you want to Google it. I'm a huge fan of something called the Advocacy Strategy Framework. And it's originally like an evaluation tool, and it's to help us think systemically about the different audiences for a campaign or for an issue or what have you. And what I think is helpful and what relates to what you're talking about is that it breaks down the kind of outcomes we're looking for into action, commitment, and consciousness. So changes in consciousness, changes in awareness, that's a valid outcome. A next level outcome would be a change in their commitment. Have you made a champion out of them? Have you made them, are they committed to taking a next step or something? And then action is kind of, yeah, we want action, but it really validates that there's a lot going on that leads to action, that the action doesn't just pop out of nowhere. It emerges from a complex set of social interactions and little accomplishments. Jill, I see your hand.
Thanks. So I was going to ask a follow-up question about the Leadership Compass. And I was also in Sarah's group, so we kind of talked about this a little bit, but I'm curious, and maybe like you said, we get into it next time, but I'm curious, when you have all those different leadership styles in the room, and my point in my career, I feel like I'm often like facilitating my bosses and my superiors, and in my example, that's like what will be happening. They'll be both peers and folks higher than me, you know, in the hierarchy, even though we don't like subscribe to that too much. But so what I'm wondering is, when you have all those different leadership styles, like, how do you kind of help them recognize that together, if that makes sense? Yeah, definitely. So one thing, Jill, I mean, in your position, you know, part of it depends on how kind of open or creative or welcome is the group to doing something. You know, some groups are just, you know, either by working with them or their, you know, their reputation, maybe they're not open to team building, or, you know, there's some cynical folks out there who don't like teams. I don't know if any of you have encountered them. So just being aware that that's an obstacle, and that, you know, sometimes we can only do so much to win those people over. And in fact, if we do try to do something that, you know, I'm like a super earnest, genuine guy, and I have to calm that down sometimes with some clients, because they're just not there, and that's not, so we have to calibrate that. One thing though is,
if you do something like the leadership compass, which is just one activity, one tool among, I mean, it's like the simplest version of all of the different personality tests and strengths finders and all, you know, the Myers-Briggs and all of those different things that tell you what you're best at. This is just a reflective one. I think those are always useful in bringing some awareness into the room about what those differences are, so that then you can hold each other accountable to them. So Mike, I see, you know, for example, Mike, oh, you, the analytical guy, once again, not chiming up. Mike, we need to hear from you. You know, don't get out of your notes, Mike, or whatever it is. You know, that having a bit more familiarity around what are these actually, we have them, we implicitly know what these differences are, right? Just by looking at the room and the dynamics and your background with them, you know what their differences are. But if we can name them and get them out on the table, then they're things we can work with. So that would be my suggestion, whatever it is, however you can bring it in. And it really is about accountability, because those different leadership types, those different personality types are drawn to participate in different ways. And so that's the other thing. You can, with knowledge in hand about who prefers what, you can also tailor your meetings to them. So maybe it's a more reflective, analytical group. Maybe it's not big plenary conversations like this one that are really going to fire them up. Maybe it's smaller breakout rooms or polls that allow them to give, you know, data and reflect on data. We can be creative in reaction to the preferences of the group too. Hope that was helpful, but I know not conclusive. Allison and then Erica.
I think for me, when I think about how I see some of our meeting objectives now, so Christina referenced like our resource sharing meetings, which is our monthly meeting where all of our partners come together, and we have like several other meetings like that, where really one of the main purposes is to provide an opportunity for people to network, get to know each other, you know, build relationships, so then they in turn can then go work as effectively as possible out in the community. And so like I think back like on all the years that we met in person, and like I feel like a lot of the work happened in the meeting, but a lot of the work happened outside of the meeting. So like the meeting that took place after the meeting, or the meeting that would take place before the meeting, like we would set up like the big council chambers, and sometimes people would show up like a half hour earlier, say a half hour later, and like so much of the work got done then. And like how to translate that to meeting virtually, because I think we'll probably keep meeting virtually for the foreseeable future, because we have such a broad service area, there's more people that can participate. And so like,
accessibility,
so we do like breakout rooms, but they feel kind of forced like most of the time. And like really holding on to that piece, like how do we create that space in our meetings for people to network, get to know each other in a way that doesn't feel forced and slightly awful and awkward sometimes.
I know what you mean. And the next couple of slides that I'm going to share will have a couple of suggestions, but I think in general, we have to be more intentional in the virtual setting, because it's not just happening over cookies or the cocktail reception or whatever after the event. We need to create it. So one thing that's been working really well for a group I work with, this is a collective impact initiative that is organized around 5 working groups, and it's a mix of nonprofit leaders and county leaders and community members, and it's this really complex thing. And each of the groups is working on something that they're trying to get to actions. They're like Sarah, they're ready for action-oriented work here. But we also realized that they needed the relationship building, and that continuing the relationship building was a key part of what was making it work, and that we were starting to lose it. So we have just a monthly, we call it like a lunch and learn allyship discussion. So it's just an open space, and it's really evolved into a beautiful open space of, we don't come with an agenda for this hour. We usually come with a video or something that, you know, a TED Talk or a commercial or something that maybe reflects on or stimulates something that we've been seeing in the group, a dynamic or whatever. But then it's really just a time to hold space together without an agenda. And that's the piece. We actually have to schedule time without an agenda, because it doesn't happen on its own. So either something like that, and the allyship, you know, you can make it as soft or as, you know, robust as you want to. What we're doing is just an open space, which is reinforcing the kind of listening and open-mindedness and those principles that we're talking about elsewhere in the work. But also, I mean, maybe it's a half-hour virtual happy hour once a month, something social. It's not going to be perfect, which is just tough. But then also being more creative with the engagement. So like the polls, having and feeding information back to them, having a dialogue around, here's what you said. There are ways to get creative, even though it's not quite the same kind of satisfactory community building that we, it's just tough, at least in my experience. When you all figure it out, please circle back and let me know. Erica.
Hi, so I have I guess a question for a challenge that I anticipate coming up that kind of hits a little bit of all the objectives. So I was just in the field and I kind of had, I was able to experience firsthand some professional facilitators from federal agencies kind of dealing with a similar challenge that I anticipate our team taking on in a few months. And so one of the things, it's a project that is coming down from the state, and so we are working very closely with rural communities that are very passionate and feel very strongly and feel very much that they are all on their own island and that no one understands. And so it's a very fine line to where these workshops and meetings become vent sessions because everyone feels like they have to air their grievances, and it just snowballs, right? And so because I recognize one of my weaknesses, I have a background in ethnographic research and interviewing, and so my first instinct is to let people say their piece and try to understand where they're coming from. But obviously when we have so many meetings and there's so much to do, so many things to go over, we don't have time. It's not effective. It's not going to be efficient to let these meetings turn into that sort of thing. And so if you have any thoughts on that, it would be great.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm seeing a lot of smiles around the screens. I think we're all very familiar with passionate groups, which is a great problem to have at the end of the day. So a couple of different things. I think, Erica, you hit the nail on the head and already identified that your instincts are probably right, because you said they feel like nobody understands them. Nobody's listening to them. They're probably right about that, right? I mean, they're not crazy people. And sorry for that pejorative word. They're not. They have the same read on the situation, the same capacity to read the situation that we do. So there's something there. And so continuing to hold that space is important. What I'm hearing that might be missing is some structure. You need like a container, a vessel for that output. So it needs to accomplish a few things. You need to be able to listen to them. It needs to be able to harvest a lot of their reactions and synthesize them, because we do want to know, right? So I'm going to transition right now to a tool set, a toolkit that has some options for you, Erica and several others of you. But one thing that I'm going to mention just before we get there is, if you remember from the first session, we talked about, especially in virtual meetings, it ultimately is about trade-offs and priorities too, right? And so I think a lot of times we, as the nonprofit or the county or the government, whatever folks, the professionals, we have information that we have to deliver, or that we feel like we have to deliver, when maybe that's not the priority for the meeting. Maybe the information is best delivered somehow else, or at a different time. Maybe this precious time is for the listening in a productive way. I think it's really rethinking or taking another look at, and I think my background's in anthropology, so the ethnographic approach is I think you're on to that. I think that is right. If people are telling you that they don't feel heard, they're right. the only solution to that is to listen. So, and I understand that that it can be chaotic, and that there are emotions running, and there are personal relationships in the room, and histories, and all of that weight. So part of it also is being comfortable sitting with that as the facilitator and being the one who's okay with and being okay naming some of what's happening, naming the tension, naming, okay, emotions are running high. That's okay, folks, but I just want to name, what's going on. I'm here, I'm holding this space for us. You kind of have to be the calm in the storm a little bit. And something that can help you do this. And I'm going to do this really quickly so that I do respect your time and be into the next 5 minutes. I am a huge fan of something called liberating structures, which is really this menu that you see here of different participatory techniques and methods. So you can see the link right there. I'll put it in the chat too, but we'll share it out as well. And for those of you who work in bilingual communities, there's also a Spanish version of this that I shared with them on Wednesday. So what I love about this, you can see here the 5 why. We did 5 whys last week. I didn't put you through all 9 why questions, but that approach, that technique is in the menu because it's something that it's an activity that stimulates deeper reflection. So you can see this is just a snapshot that tells us, all right, what is the 9 whys activity? Oh, it's a powerful purpose. A powerful purpose attracts participation and has 2 essential tributes. Oh, okay, I'm already getting a sense of what this does. What's really cool is this website really makes it easy for us to figure out, and this is why I'm emphasizing this website and not walking you through each individual activity, because I want you to be able to find the solutions to whatever your needs are going forward. So there's like a matrix even that helps us figure out which activities help us do what. Oh, and this is the one in Spanish. Sorry, I'll do it. I'll translate this matrix into English. But it helps us figure out, some help us discover solutions. Some help us sketch out prototypes. Some help us innovate. We can pick which activities work best. And like I said, they're already invented. You don't have to come up with anything new. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. The activities are right here. And what I'll show just as we're transitioning a little bit to the close is what the website actually looks like as well. So here you can see we have the 9 whys activity. I have the whole menu here on the website with stories, so case studies about how people have used them. But what's really valuable is that right here, I have everything I need to do this activity. I have some quotes that kind of, get me inspired about what I'm trying to accomplish. It tells me what it's trying to do, what the different specs are, kind of how does this work? What are the minimum things required? What's the space? And then it gives me the actual step-by-step. How can you innovate on this? What are some mistakes you might make? It gives you a little script here that you could just copy and paste into your presentation. It's like that for a number of different activities. So I would just encourage that you check that out, which is actually, as we come to our close, and I'll ask if anybody has any questions. That's actually what I'd like to do for next week. So first of all, if you could please head back to Mentimeter, help me out with just a last day or a last couple questions of feedback, just to let me know how today went, and I can recalibrate or calibrate as needed. I'll move and just get that on the right page. Okay, give me 1 second, folks. You'll be seeing what you need to see. Okay, so here's where we're going. It's the same Mentimeter, same code, same QR. This time I just need a little feedback on the day. So it's the same, should still be in the chat if you're going that way. And I'm just going to click through as you're transitioning so that we don't lose time. And while you're responding, and you can see it's in English today, so hopefully that's a little easier. The homework that I'm going to ask you to do for next time, and it's just a very broad ask. Look through that Liberating Structures menu. Just take a look through it at some point between now and next Friday, and pick out one that's interesting to you. That's it. And do your best with that. Don't dedicate more time than you have. I know you're all busy people and you're already coming to these trainings, which I appreciate. Great, and thank you for your feedback here. We are almost at, or we are at 10:30 your time. Allison or Phyllis, Caroline, do we have any announcements for the group before we close out? I see that there's an announcement in the chat, an opportunity, which I'm glad to see that exchange happening.
I don't have anything on my end, Caroline or Phyllis. Just we look forward to seeing you back here next week, and please invite all your colleagues and coworkers and board members and anybody else who could benefit from this. I feel like, Nate, we haven't had this level of training in our community at a local level in many, many years. So I think it's such a great opportunity for all of our partners to participate.
That's great. Well, it's been a lot of fun so far. So awesome. I even got a song request in the direct message in the chat. So love the diverse forms of participation. Jump in however you're feeling called, as I like to say. All right, so thank you all again for your participation, for showing up with as much energy as you did on a Friday morning. I appreciate it. I hope we're leaving you with a little energy to finish out your day. And you'll be hearing from us soon with the slides and recordings and other resources. But otherwise, I'll see you at the same time, same place next week.